Cabernet tends to be the sort of Errol Flynn of the grape varieties.
One of Australia's leading beer judges.
People always ask, how do you get involved in sake and how does that connect to music?
Because wine is an adventure.
Conventional winemakers who just condemn all natural wine as faulty.
The prestigious title of Sake Samurai.
Looking at whiskey in more of an artful culinary way.
The difference between getting good quality fresh hops, it just translates straight through into the beer.
This is the Drinks Adventures podcast. I'm James Atkinson, and this is the show where I speak to some of the world's most exciting producers of beer, wine and spirits and uncover trends and issues in the drinks industry today. Welcome to what is a special edition of the Drinks Adventures podcast as we take an in-depth look at McWilliam's wines. McWilliam's is one of Australia's best-known family wine companies, with a rich history of 143 years, encompassing a huge variety of different wine styles and wine regions stretching the entire breadth of the country. Its family ownership recently came to an end following a period of well-publicised financial struggles. You've previously met Scott McWilliam on this podcast back in Season 2, when we discussed his unique beer-wine hybrid, the Chardonnay IPA. Scott joins me again this episode, together with his relatives Stephen and Chris McWilliam. All three family members were still working in the business at the time of its recent sale. And Stephen gave me access to some really cool archive material that was enough to tempt me to turn this into a documentary-style episode. If you've been listening to this podcast from the very beginning, you'll know that I've previously experimented with the documentary format, most notably with a really popular episode on the history-making feats of Stone and Wood Brewing Company. That was nearly 18 months ago now, so I've sufficiently recovered to attempt another one. Thanks to the McWilliam family for their candid conversation during what has been a pretty tumultuous time. This special report by Drinks Adventures is coming up right after this. What I love about Australian craft spirits is that our distillers are truly free to experiment. We aren't governed by rules and traditions. That's why the flavour and character of Australian spirits is so unique. But it takes distilling prowess and another critical ingredient to bring these products to market, and that ingredient is Bintani. Bintani supplies distillers with malts of all colours, flavours and aromas. They have a leading range of yeast and other ingredients and the professional expertise to help distillers create the spirits of their dreams. Make Bintani your partner in taste and quality.
I guess it's a sad reality that it's eventuating like this. All good things come to an end.
You had generations of drinkers like me who were introduced to McWilliam's and they stayed with them.
It's a shame and we're really upset because they're fabulous people.
We're asset rich and cash poor. Yeah, there is a fair bit of disappointment within the family.
McWilliam's in their heyday were the kings of fortified wine.
There are aspects of McWilliam's history that have been hugely important.
I think Australia's reputation for high-quality wines has certainly had a large part played by McWilliam's.
6 months after McWilliam's wines went into voluntary administration, the company's sale to Persistent Asset Management was confirmed in July 2020. The transaction brings to an end 143 years of family ownership for McWilliam's, Australia's sixth largest wine company.
I'm Don McWilliam, Chairman and fourth generation of the McWilliam family. Great wines are not made by great corporations. Great wines are made by people.
Don McWilliam AM passed away in 2017. This audio is taken from a company video recorded in the late 90s.
And the fruit as it ripens. People who taste and blend and wait. People like the McWilliam family.
Stephen McWilliam, fifth generation, been with the company 45 and a half years.
Stephen McWilliam is one of Don's sons.
Yeah, it was my great-great-grandfather who made the first wine in Corowa in 1877. And it was his son, John James McWilliam, one of many children that he had, who basically took up making the wine. He was also sent to France to learn how to make wine, etc. And all of the children under JJ stayed within the family company.
Plant a 3-inch nail in this soil, water it, and in a year you'll have a crowbar. So said my grandfather John James McWilliam in 1913 when he arrived at Hamwood near Griffith, New South Wales, with a bullock cart carrying 40,000 vine cuttings.
Glenn McWilliam is one of JJ's 4 sons. He's speaking here in 1974 at McWilliam's Hamwood Estate cellar door in the Riverina.
My father and his eldest son, Jack, they came here in 1913. They brought up 6 varieties of grapes, I think it was. We've introduced new varieties. There is, I think, some 33 varieties at the present time being grown here, with about probably 10 or 12 main varieties.
So from 1877 through to probably about the early 1940s, 30s, 40s was predominantly fortified wines. I think some of the figures were 1 in every 4 bottles of fortified bought in Australia was a McWilliam's fortified, and 50% of those were McWilliam's cream sherry, an easy to drink, soft style of wine.
Back in season 1 of this podcast, we heard from Penfold's fortified winemaker James Godfrey that fortifieds once accounted for as much as 85% of Australia's total wine consumption.
I think Big Don McWilliam told me that they were the only company who kept their reps on the road in the bush during the Second World War. And that's why they owned the fortified market in the Second World War, right through, the 70s, 80s, 90s, early 2000s until that market moved on.
That's Bruce Tyrrell, Managing Director of another iconic family wine company, Tyrrell's Wines. Scott McWilliam is a 6th-generation family member who has been with the company in a variety of roles for the last 20 years.
Today, our fortified portfolio is still significant in the whole mix. We still produce roughly about 25% of our product is fortified in terms of volume.
But is that sort of something that's been still in constant decline, or...?
Constant decline.
Yeah.
Sadly, they're amazing wines. It's just their market acceptance is declined, especially in the younger generation.
McWilliam's cream sherry. A bar in a bottle. What will be your favourite, Mac?
Like wine, but more like liqueur. I see what you mean.
McWilliam's sherry.
Everyone says they're all fortified, and then people forget things like Philip Hermitage and Elizabeth Riesling, which between them early 80s were probably 250,000 cases a year. So they were significant table wine producers. And Kings of the Hunter a bit. Between Nay and Lindemans, that was the guts of Hunter Valley table wine, 60s, 70s, 80s.
This wine is our Elizabeth Semillon, the highest awarded white wine in the Australian wine show circuit. The wine is made as a fresh, lemony, citrusy flavoured white wine from classic Semillon grapes grown down in our Lovedale and Mount Pleasant vineyards.
Former Mount Pleasant chief winemaker Phil Ryan speaking there. Elizabeth Semillon was known as Elizabeth Hunter Riesling until the 1990s, as wineries such as McWilliam's and Tyrrell's transitioned to labelling by grape variety rather than indicative style.
I remember we had an agreement with them as to when we would change from Hunter River Riesling to Semillon. We did it within about 3 weeks or 4 weeks of each other. They were, as a company, very, very close to Tyrrell's. You knew that if you needed a favour badly, you could get one, and you'd always give it back. There was never a question. My sales force were under instruction that if there was a spare hole on a wine list, McWilliam's was the one you filled it with first.
We always produced a quality wine. If you go back and have a look at some of the wine shows that our wines won awards, we were consistently the most successful exhibitor at the Sydney Wine Show for many, many years.
17 consecutive years.
It's amazing, isn't it? And that endorses the quality of our product against our peers.
You started off on the lower branches, the Riverina wines. They pioneered that region, and those early wines were about approachability, quality, everyday drinking, good price. And that's where you started off. And then you worked your way up to the Hunter Valley vineyards. And then you were getting into the premium and super premium possibilities of Australian wine, of aged Semillon like the Elizabeth, such an amazing wine, the Lovedale Semillon, the Maurice O'Shea Shiraz. So then you were getting into learning more about the role of history, winemaking traditions, the importance of old vines, and just that whole culture about wine drinking, winemaking.
Wine writer Jenny Port speaking there.
5 generations later, the McWilliam family has vineyards in South Australia, New South Wales and Victoria. A simple little Franciscan friar became synonymous with McWilliam's wines.
If you go back into McWilliam's old advertising, they had this great little character of a friar, like you'd expect from Robin Hood or something, who seemed to sum up this fun approach to wine.
Whether you fish and catch your own or buy it, you'll enjoy it.
JJ McWilliam's third son, Keith, drove some of the company's earliest marketing efforts, including the creation of the cartoon mascot Friar, featured in this advertisement.
McWilliam's Lexia, one of the range of McWilliam's prize-winning private bin show wines.
They were very canny about how they projected their image to wine tourists as well. Have you been to the Cellar Door in the Riverina at Hanwood?
We met wine writer Max Allen a few episodes ago on this podcast.
So you pull up in the car park and there's this massive barrel that's been turned on its side and one end has been knocked out. So it really taps into that Australian fascination for big things. And you walk in and I just love that idea. It's kind of so daggy to us now, but it has this sense of, wine isn't, just about dusty cellars and the old world. It's about bringing fun to wine again. So I think that there's always been that neat combination of the fun and accessibility of wine without losing focus on the quality at the same time, and that's demonstrated no more clearly than with Mount Pleasant in the Hunter and the jewel that I think McWilliam's have recognised that place is.
Mount Pleasant, nestled into the slopes of the Broken Back Range, was established in 1921 by revered winemaker Maurice O'Shea.
So, they were one of the big companies, and in a time where the big companies were nearly all family companies. And as I suppose a lot of the family companies did in those days, they took a position of leadership and did things that were not necessarily in the best interest of their own company, but were in the best interest of the industry.
Hopefully other people are mentioning this, but the importance of the O'Shea Awards in the 90s onwards, I think the industry really responds well to leadership initiatives that focus on achievement and that give the industry an opportunity to come together as a community.
The Maurice O'Shea Award was founded in 1990 by the McWilliam family. Paying homage to the legendary Mount Pleasant founder, the award is presented in recognition of the contribution an individual, group or organisation has made to the Australian wine industry.
And that's very typical of how I perceive my family, to give back to the industry. And we've been very involved in the industry. And Chris and Stephen's dad, Don McWilliam, as I said, is an absolute industry icon. My father, Douglas, was on 1,000 committees and boards and was the chair of the Australian Wine Research Institute for about a 10-year period, those sorts of things. And we feel that our industry colleagues have been very good to us.
The 1990s was a boom era for Australian wine and brought expansion for McWilliam's into new regions.
The Hilltops in 1989 with the purchase of what's called the Barling Vineyard. And then in 1990, a 50% purchase into the Branslera operation in Coonawarra, and the second 50% purchase in 94. And it was that same year we purchased Lilydale Estate in the Yarra Valley. So we were starting to cover all bases. The only one that we really didn't have was Western Australia. That changed in 2007 with the acquisition of the Evans and Tate brand and some of the vineyard sites over there. So the company grew substantially and we started to take fruit from multiple regions.
But things started to get harder for McWilliam's. In the 1970s, the company had signed a 50-year lease on a building in Chullora, 15 kilometres west of Sydney.
We were transporting our wine by rail from Hanwood and it'd be brought up to Chullora. The railway line was pretty much right next to where our cellars were, so we were able to drain the wine into our tanks, do the bottling, and then we could put it on trucks and away it would go. So for 25, 30 years, it was absolutely fantastic for us.
But over time, and for a variety of reasons, McWilliam's scaled back operations at Chullora. By 2017, it had no requirement for the building at all. Yet the company is still locked into this long-term lease, which today costs $3 million in rent a year. This is Stephen's brother Chris McWilliam speaking.
It was based on market value, but that market value was continually going up. I mean, we copped a big hit when it was sold. I think from memory it went up 4 times overnight.
It's probably ended up a bit of a noose around our neck.
The company had also taken on a lot of debt to fund its global expansion through a new partnership with the world's largest wine company, E&J Gallo.
And then some of the pressures started to hit when the market had a bit of a downturn. And there was many reasons for that. And in the US in particular, the Australian dollar became very strong, so it became less lucrative for us to export there. At the same time, South America was becoming on trend and Australia less so. So we kind of got hit pretty hard in the North American scene. And in Europe, it was always a bit hit and miss. It was always a big volume play, but very little margin play. So as a result, our international market really fell away. And when we were geared up to the eyeballs with debt, the cash flow became a struggle.
McWilliam's Wines, Australia's 6th largest winemaker, has entered voluntary administration. The family-owned company spanning 6 generations...
McWilliam's has always made very high-quality, value-for-money driven product. And in fact, that could have been our undoing, that we were putting very good wine into a cheap price point. And our margin was eroded to the point where it was, once you're down, you can't get back up. And then the premiumisation with the McWilliam brand in particular kicked in, and maybe a little bit late, but better late than never. Yet we always will have the stigma in many people's minds of being McWilliam's the cream sherry maker. And whilst we're really improving with our packaging and our market presence in our premiumisation push, we still have a younger generation who don't want to drink what their parents drink or even their grandparents drink for that matter. And that's been very difficult for us to break through that glass ceiling.
There's very little information available about the new owner of McWilliam's, Persistent Asset Management, and its investment track record. Executive Chairman Charles Hunting could not be contacted for comment. McWilliam's was one of 12 family-owned wine companies that in 2009 established Australia's first families of wine, a global marketing initiative aimed at raising awareness about Australian wine. The current chairman is Stephen Henschke.
Clearly, if you're not 100% family-owned, you can't be a member. So obviously they'll no longer be a member of Australia's first families of wine, unfortunately. We're disappointed, obviously, because there are only a handful of the old original family-owned wineries that have been going for 5 or 6 generations, and it's sad to lose one that has played such a major role in the wine industry and the wine community over 143 years.
And Stephen, what does that mean for AFFW? Because obviously you've already lost another member into Borderley not that long ago.
Well, we'll continue on. We're still a very strong 10 first families, and we're all very proud of being a part of it. Down the track, there'll be other wineries who will aspire to join AFFW, and we welcome that to happen.
We'll miss their presence in the valley as they were, as a family business. You know, we've got to meet the new owners, we've got to find out who they are, and they may do an even better job for the area. We'll see as time goes on.
But optimism within the wine industry about the long-term prospects for a historic brand such as McWilliam's under private equity ownership is in short supply.
Sadly, in general terms, private equity has invested in wine companies around the world, and its motivations aren't necessarily long-term. And they aren't necessarily in the interests of those who remain loyal to a wine brand or to wine drinkers, or that's some of the recent history that we've seen. Their interest lies squarely in making a return for their shareholders.
I just can't help feeling that families are better suited to the long-term aspects of wine than shorter-term focused corporate entities are. If you look back through history, you know, there are so many examples of wine companies that were family-owned becoming corporate and losing their way and just losing their soul.
I think, you know, as multi-generational family-owned wineries probably the most important thing is our history and heritage and what that means to Australia. And I think, family-owned businesses are pivotal to long-term thinking, long-term planning, making long-term decisions, and not just based on a board wanting a big bottom line all the time. It's a very different business structure to corporations.
But at the same time, it's not universal that happens. And there are plenty of examples of really great non-family-owned anymore brands in Australia that are going great guns. And the most obvious, of course, is Penfolds.
Max Allen again. The McWilliam family has plenty to be positive about following the sale. Family members are among the creditors of the business, which was otherwise confronting the prospect of liquidation.
Being a family company, still 100% family-owned, after 140-something years, is a great achievement, which we're very, very proud of that.
One thing I remember, Stephen, you said to me, it may have been a year or two ago, when you asked your dad, Don, what do you think we should do? And you told me the response from Don was, sell it and let the brand live. And it will live. The brand will live. The McWilliam name is a global name and it won't just go away.
For over 120 years since my great-grandfather, Samuel McWilliam, planted his first vines in 1877, successive generations of the McWilliams family.
At one stage, there were as many as 22 McWilliam family members working in the business. By the time of the recent sale, they numbered just 4. 3 of whom we've heard from in this podcast.
The one that's missing in the room is my Chris's daughter, Melissa, who went through a cadet program with our company, and she's now studying winemaking in our Hamwood winery.
When we went down to celebrate the Hamwood centenary back in 2013, she was still at school then, but really loved the atmosphere of being in a winery. She had it in the blood, so she's now got another couple of years at Wagga doing wine science.
And she's just completed her first vintage and she loved every minute of it.
This particular vintage, she was officially an assistant winemaker. So yeah, she's pretty much dedicated her life to it now.
So Melissa will carry the baton for the McWilliams as a 6th-generation family member working under the new ownership regime along with her cousin Scott.
Despite the ownership change which is impending, the legacy of McWilliam's wines will still live on.
The Drinks Adventures podcast is produced by me, James Atkinson, with additional production and mixing by Dave Robertson. You can find complete transcripts, links and other information on the show at drinksadventures.com.au. You can follow me on all social media platforms at @ByJamesAtkinson, like my Facebook page, James Atkinson Drinks Adventures, to be kept informed of podcast giveaways and other news about the show. The Drinks Adventures podcast needs your support as listeners. Please do us a favour and leave an honest review and rating for the podcast on iTunes or Stitcher. We love hearing your feedback and it helps inform other people this is a show worth listening to. Or simply drop us a line at hello@drinksadventures.com.au.